So KZ released a new IEM belonging to the PR series. KZ's pretty well-known planar IEMs, which received kinda mixed feedback because while the PR1 and PR1 Pro were pretty nice as an entry into the planar world, the PR2 received a lot of drama with uncommunicated revisions that changed the sound significantly. Still, the PR2 in its various versions was still a good IEM. The PR3 though was pretty much something that nobody wanted, I guess, meaning it was really bright with a noticeably reduced bass. So now what I have here is not the PR4, it's the PRX. And I was excited to try these out and see for myself if KZ can kind of remedy the situation here. So let's go right into it. By now, the overall design of the PRX should be of no surprise since it looks eerily similar to its predecessors. Yes, the vents do look somewhat different this time, and you have a blue streak here in the middle, but it truly is noticeable that it belongs to the PR series. With that, the build feels really good and I have no issues here. You get a see-through shell on the inner side and you can actually see a bluish cover around the driver. So the magnet array of the planar driver is barely visible this time. Just a small detail, but I thought it's kinda interesting. Ear tips and cable should also be known by now, because you do get the same as usual, meaning the black silicone clothy ear tips that work well for me, and well, let's call it acceptable cable. Regarding comfort, I'm a big fan of these KZ shells because they work really well with my ears and they have a kind of a really universal shape, I think. They're pretty average sized all around and should not cause any issues with most ears. And while the included ear tips work well for me, they feel like they are prone to cause more sweating. At least subjectively, it feels like that for me. But yeah, not a lot more to say here. Comfortable I am. So how does the PRX fare sound-wise? Well, it does sound a bit like the version of the PR2 that I had, that being the first one without the mesh in front of the magnet array, but just more balanced. But let's start from the beginning. Bass is slightly elevated and more so than on the PR3, which is a good thing, but it is of course still not a bassy IM. It's a very clean experience with a focus on the sub bass that never gets overwhelming, but goes pretty deep and is very well defined. Going further along the bass frequencies, mid bass and upper bass is enough to not sound thin and to give a bit of weight to the fundamental notes. It also has that signature planar fastness in how the bass sounds, so you do not get a drawn out boom and thickness from stronger bass notes, but it always sounds more like a fast and tight hit, which is great for double bass drums, for example. It never gets cluttered or muddy and has an all-around sharp and clean image, but with enough fullness to not sound flat or something, and it actually sounds pretty groovy on some tracks. The bass works for many genres, but could be not enough if you really want a certain amount of bass emphasis. For example, if you want more kick from your kick drums and such. But I still think it does a very good job here, mixing a clean bass sound with enough force and depth behind that. Having a transparent mid-range is kind of a trademark of the more recently released IEMs from the PR series, but I think the PRX does sound more refined and more balanced here. It sounds a bit less forward with vocals than its predecessors, in the same way as it does sound less edgy with guitars and a bit more trebly instruments. And I also remember snare hits being a bit too intense sometimes on the earlier iterations, which is not the case anymore. They actually reduced some of the intensity in the upper mid-range and lower treble, which I think was a fantastic idea because it still sounds exceptionally clean and open, but now it's finally smoother in these areas. And by the way, I was listening to some acoustic guitar parts in various songs and they sounded quite special and had a more brilliant feel to them. Same with vocals, but always in a not exhausting to listen to way. And I always appreciate headphones or IEMs kind of finding that balance between clarity and not sounding dull or like losing some of this attack in electronic guitars. And they can easily sound too harsh if you focus on a very clear sound, but the PRX does that pretty well. So, the treble, a big topic of discussion with the PR line. And well, it's still somewhat bright on top, but to my ears, treble here also sounds more smooth while keeping that airy sound that focuses on cymbal crashes and shine. It's very well extended without sounding shrill like some of the earlier releases did. There's maybe a slight amount of sibilance sometimes, but it's really minuscule, and at least for me, these are not fatiguing to listen to. For planar magnetic, which often suffer from this artificial metallic sound in the upper registers, the PRX does surprisingly well. And the treble fits in with the rest of the sound profile and does not sound like it cuts through the sound like a knife and ignores everything else. The PRX also does really well regarding separation and hearing many of the smaller things that are happening in your music, although that was kinda expected since the former iterations were also pretty capable. But I think the PRX is noteworthy here because for its price range, it is really good here. And what's especially nice for an IEM is its open sound and staging, and they finally did it without throwing overly intense treble energy at you. So that's it for this review. As usual, I hope I could be of some help here and you did get some information that you were craving. But yeah, hope to see you next time. Goodbye.